At least I still have my balls, Your Honor. I caught the sharp hiss from my lawyer and, out of the corner of my eye, noticed the way he shot a glare in my direction. You'd think a guy charging as much per hour as he did would have better control over his reactions. He had warned me, no, practically begged me, to stop saying that line. According to him, we were losing public sympathy every time I repeated it, and public sympathy apparently played a big role in nudging judges toward lighter sentences. But there was something my overpriced legal expert didn't know. From where I sat, handcuffed in the dock, I had a much clearer view of the judge than he did. I had caught the fleeting smile on the judge's face the first time I said it. It had been there just for a second, quickly hidden, but I saw it. I also saw where his eyes automatically drifted, to the guy I had beaten up, sitting stiffly at his lawyer's table, glaring at me. Seemed like the judge wasn't too fond of him either. "Can I have another word with my client, Your Honor?" my lawyer asked. The judge let out a tired sigh. "I doubt it'll make much difference, Mr. Holloway. Your last 3 attempts didn't seem to." This time, he didn't bother to hide his grin as my lawyer shuffled over and whispered something in my ear. I wasn't a fan of the guy. He was all about putting on airs. I, on the other hand, was just a straight shooter. He was the kind of guy who looked down on people. I was the kind of guy who told it like it was. If I had any say in the matter, I wouldn't have hired him. But the choice wasn't mine. My best friend, Mark, had made that call. Now, was Mark some rich guy with more money than sense, willing to throw a fortune at my lost cause? Nope. Mark and I had lived about the same, comfortable but nothing extravagant. Well, at least I used to before I got locked up 8 months ago. My lawyer wasn't being paid out of some deep-pocketed benefactor's goodwill. No, his fees were covered by a wildly successful GoFundMe campaign that Mark had set up. Apparently, a lot of people had their own opinions about the situation. When word got around about how much money had poured into my defense fund, my so-called victim decided to launch his own. The media made a big deal out of it. That backfired in the worst way. Turned out, once people learned what he had done to provoke me, he wasn't exactly a sympathetic figure. Meanwhile, I became something of a folk hero, if the mountain of fan mail I was getting was anything to go by. And yeah, I still had my balls. After yet another plea from my lawyer to cut out the provocative remarks, he retreated back to his seat, and we both turned our attention to the judge. "Mr. Calloway," the judge began, "your lawyer has a point. The victim in this case deserves more sympathy and respect than you're showing him." His words were firm, but from where I was sitting, I caught the flicker of amusement in his eyes, a tiny sparkle that told a different story. "I'm truly sorry, Your Honor," I replied, keeping my tone light. "I just thought I was stating the obvious. I have a pair of testicles. The guy I caught getting a little too comfortable with my soon-to-be ex-wife does not, unless, of course, he keeps them in a box somewhere." This time, the look the judge shot me made it clear I was pushing my luck. But just as quickly as his expression hardened, it softened again. That was my cue to shut up. "Now, Mr. Calloway," he continued, settling back into his official tone. "As I was saying, you have pleaded guilty to assault causing actual bodily harm. The maximum penalty for that is 8 years in prison." "No, please. Let's not go down that road again." Both of us instinctively glanced at the prosecution's table, where my victim had once again turned an impressive shade of red. Whether it was embarrassment or fury, I couldn't say. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," the judge said dryly before moving on. "Now, your lawyer has argued that at the time of the incident, you were suffering from temporary insanity and therefore should not be held fully responsible for your actions. The court-ordered psychiatric evaluation, however, suggests otherwise. By all accounts, you are as sane as any other man. But, as the psychiatrist noted," he glanced down at his notes, "temporary insanity is a stimulus-driven autonomic phenomenon." For once, I followed my lawyer's advice and kept my mouth shut, only speaking when asked a direct question. The courtroom fell silent. Everyone had already heard the victim impact statement. "So, before I hand down your sentence, Mr. Calloway, can you look me in the eye and tell me your story again?" the judge asked. "Of course, Your Honor. At least what I remember of it," I replied. I hesitated for a moment, letting my gaze drift toward the gallery. My wife was there. She lowered her eyes the second our eyes met. She hadn't been present the last time I told my side of things, probably trying to avoid the embarrassment. I doubt she expected to hear it all again today. She must have been struggling with what to do now. Run out again? Or stay put and act like she was standing by me, hoping I'd forgive her and take her back? Fat chance. No matter what, she'd have to face this on her own: humiliation, public disgrace, the shame of being caught in such a scandal with nowhere to hide. It had all started that night at the bar. My wife and I, along with a few friends, were having a good time when that spineless excuse for a man, the so-called victim, walked up to her and asked her to dance. He didn't even have the decency to ask me first. Not that I was the kind of guy to make a scene over something like that, but it still rubbed me the wrong way. She danced with him, twice, maybe 3 times. Then she came back to our table, and I figured that was the end of it. Turns out I was wrong. A little later, she disappeared. And when I finally found out where she went, it was straight to him. I paused, inhaling deeply to keep my anger in check. Even after all these months, just thinking about it sent a wave of rage through me. One of the shrinks had told me once that anger is never a first-hand emotion. It always comes from something else: pain, betrayal. Well, if nothing else, my time in here had taught me that much. "Go on, please, Mr. Calloway," the judge prompted. I nodded. "Well, Your Honor, I figured he'd taken her back to his place, and since a few people knew where he lived, it wasn't hard to find. Sure enough, his flashy car was parked in the garage. They must have been in a hurry. Not only had they left the garage door open, but the interior door to the house was unlocked. I didn't need to break in," I continued. "I just walked inside." The judge gave a small nod. "Yes. The police report doesn't mention any forced entry, Mr. Calloway." "You'll have to forgive me, Your Honor," I said, feigning uncertainty. But from that point on, my memory gets a little hazy. I remember getting angrier as I moved through the house, looking for them. I vaguely recall stopping at the bottom of a staircase and hearing noises. Sounded like they were coming from one of the upstairs bedrooms. And that's it. That's where my memory cuts out. I shrugged. The next thing I knew, the police were there. 1 second, I was at the bottom of the stairs. The next, I was in cuffs. The images I have in my head from that 15-minute window, I don't know if they're real or if they're just what the police kept telling me must have happened. I did my best to maintain a puzzled expression as the judge studied me. My lawyer had hammered this angle hard. His argument was airtight. The confession I'd signed that night? It was taken under questionable circumstances. The police had made mistakes, and there were significant gaps in the records of where I had been while in their custody. My lawyer had successfully planted the idea that I had been interrogated. More like bullied, off the record, with officers exploiting my emotional state to drill a version of events into my head. That version then became my truth, and under duress, I signed a confession. Of course, in reality, I remembered everything. I remembered the sounds. The way my wife's voice was encouraging, not reluctant. The moment all hope of her being an unwilling participant was crushed. I remembered following the noises to an open door, stepping inside and seeing her, on all fours, completely exposed, with him behind her. The same guy I'd watched her dance with. Something inside me snapped. Maybe it wasn't true insanity, but whatever it was, I lost control. I don't think I should be blamed for what happened next. They hadn't noticed me at first. She was too busy urging him on, completely oblivious to the fact that I was standing right there. In that moment, a single thought took over. I might always be the guy she humiliated, the man whose wife betrayed him so publicly. I might not be able to measure up to this guy in every way, but at least I still had my balls. In that moment, my emotions got the best of me, and I acted without thinking. It all happened so fast. Before I knew it, he was on the ground. The reaction was instant, and honestly a little comedic. He jolted forward, which sent my wife's head crashing into the headboard, momentarily stunning her. Then he tumbled backward, rolling off of her completely, his legs sprawled out. For a moment he just lay there, staring at me, then at his ruined groin. He hadn't even registered the full pain yet. But the horror in his eyes? That would stay with me for a long, long time. Even locked up, that memory kept me smiling. The judge cleared his throat. "Yes, Mr. Calloway, your lawyer has made all of this very clear." He sighed, flipping through his notes. "The police department in question has already made significant changes to its procedures as a result of this case. That you were at the scene is undisputed. So is the fact that, after the assault, you rendered first aid to the victim, something that, according to 3 separate character witnesses, is entirely in line with your nature. That your wife didn't see the actual moment of the assault is immaterial. There is no doubt you were the one responsible for the injuries sustained by the victim, which had long-term consequences for him." The room was dead silent. "The only real question," the judge continued, "is your state of mind at the time." He leaned back slightly. "As I mentioned, the statutory penalty is up to 8 years in prison. However, I am allowed to consider the level of provocation you endured, as well as the state of mind you were likely in when the assault occurred. And as for deterrence..." He glanced toward my wife in the gallery, his expression filled with barely concealed disgust. "I highly doubt you will ever be subjected to this level of emotional and, quite frankly, sickening provocation again." The weight of his words settled over the courtroom. My wife seemed to shrink into her seat. She wasn't surrounded by any friends. From what I had heard from my cell, she didn't have many left. My case had been all over the news. At first, because of the notoriety of my so-called victim. Then, because people started digging into how celebrities like him used their fame to get away with things regular men couldn't. And finally, because of the GoFundMe account. Some of the men my wife's lover had previously wronged turned out to be quite wealthy. And before long, the fund had swelled into 6 figures. As the case gained attention, many people expressed their support in different ways. It grew bigger than me, bigger than my wife, and turned into something impossible to ignore. Somewhere along the way, I must have gotten lost in my thoughts, because suddenly, I realized there was applause. We all rose as the judge exited the courtroom. I looked around, taking in the smiles, the thumbs up from strangers. I turned to my lawyer. "What the hell just happened?" He smirked. "The judge ruled you temporarily insane, you lucky bastard. Time served. 3 years probation. You're a free man." We shook hands, and he oversaw my release process. Even the bailiff gave me a firm handshake, clapped me on the back, and leaned in with a grin. "Man, I'm real glad you still have your balls." I couldn't help but chuckle as he led me and my ever-serious lawyer through a back exit, steering us away from the media circus waiting out front. Once we stepped outside, I turned to my lawyer, thanked him for everything, and we parted ways. As I rounded the courthouse steps, I caught sight of the pack of reporters gathered near the entrance. Or should I say, the clan, since that's what you call a group of hyenas. Apparently, swapping out my prison jumpsuit for regular clothes had thrown them off because not a single camera turned my way as I strolled past. Instead, I spotted a smaller gathering off to the side. Well, I'll be damned. My so-called victim was holding his own press conference. He stood on the lower steps, flanked by his lawyer, facing a row of cameras. As I got close enough to hear, I caught him grandstanding in his usual dramatic fashion. "I vow to appeal today's decision," he declared. "It was a travesty of justice. Furthermore, I will be launching a civil suit to clear my name. Adultery is not a crime." One by one, the camera operators started shifting their focus, away from him and onto me. By the time I stepped onto the same level as him, half the cameras had turned my way. For someone who always carried himself with confidence, he suddenly seemed a lot less sure of himself. He took a step back, looking uneasy. The second he hit the ground, his head snapped toward the cameras. He realized exactly how weak that made him look. I smiled down at him, slow and deliberate. "Good luck with the appeal. And the lawsuit." I paused just long enough to let the moment sink in. "Win or lose, I'll still hold my head high." His face turned a deep, satisfying shade of red. The next day, the headlines were absolutely priceless. The media had a field day with the headlines, making jokes at Grayson's expense. Some of them were so over the top, even I had to laugh. All that extra publicity only made my GoFundMe swell even more, allowing me to retain the best civil lawyer I could find. Not that I expected to win a lawsuit, but I figured he could at least help minimize the damage. Except the lawsuit never came. 1 month passed. Then 2. Nothing. Then one night I got my answer. I was at my usual bar, having a quiet beer on my way home, when a large figure stepped up behind me. I knew he was big from the sheer shadow he cast over me. "Don't turn around," he said, his voice calm but firm. I stayed still, waiting. He continued, "I work with a men's support group. We help husbands who've been wronged. Some of our guys had a little talk with Grayson. He decided not to sue. I didn't ask for details. Didn't need to. Judging by the size of the man standing behind me, I could imagine well enough. Instead, I offered to buy him a drink. He declined, so I just nodded and thanked him. He asked me to keep facing the bar until he left, and I obliged. It's good to have friends, even the ones you never meet. After that, I kept an eye on Grayson's career. Not that there was much of it left. He was quietly dropped from the major league he'd once been the star of and relegated to a minor league. Reports estimated his earnings had tanked by more than 90%. The only time he made the news again was about a year later. Some late-night TV show did a segment on fallen celebrities, and a buddy of mine recorded it for me. There he was, whining in a noticeably higher-pitched voice about the injustice of it all. Without testosterone, he explained, he had lost muscle mass, drive, and aggression. On top of that, he had to deal with the constant jeers from opponents. The final blow to his career came during a game when another player supposedly whispered, "At least I still have my balls." It was caught on camera. Grayson spun around and slapped the guy across the face. If he'd thrown a punch, maybe he could have salvaged some respect. But a slap? That just sealed his fate. Less than a month later, he was kicked off the team for taking illegal testosterone supplements. His desperate attempt to compensate for what I'd taken from him. I never heard his name again after that, except in conversations about the risks of infidelity. As for Michelle, well, she didn't fare much better. Anyone who tried to stand by her quickly realized it wasn't worth it. Friends, family, acquaintances. Once they saw the public humiliation attached to her, they distanced themselves fast. The media had dragged out every dirty detail of her betrayal, leaving her nowhere to hide. She became the poster child for unfaithful wives. She tried to leave town, hoping to escape the shame, but my lawyer, yes, the best money could buy, made sure she couldn't take the kids with her. She spiraled after that, turned to drinking. One night I got a call from the kids. They were home alone. Michelle had crashed her car through the garage door and was passed out behind the wheel. They couldn't wake her up. I made sure the cops got there before I did. I also left the garage door open, making sure the media got a clear shot of the kids' play equipment, sitting right next to the wreckage of Michelle's car. Her DUI was the final nail in the coffin. My lawyer convinced a judge that she was an unfit mother, but even he wasn't bold enough to argue that I, a convicted assaulter, should get custody. Instead, he proposed a solution, granting legal guardianship to my parents. The judge agreed, and with the financial support I could now provide, my kids had everything they needed. I moved in with my folks and made sure they never had to worry again. Michelle? She got worse. Her drinking made supervised visits unbearable, and after a few months, she gave up entirely and left town. Now, she sends the kids a card on their birthdays and at Christmas. They barely acknowledge them. As for me, well, let's just say fame or infamy attracted a lot of attention from women. I could have taken advantage of that. But I wasn't interested in women who were only drawn to my story. Eventually, I met someone. Calling her lovely doesn't do her justice. I'm in awe of her. She fled Ukraine with her 2 small children, bringing along her nieces after her sister and brother-in-law were killed early in the war. Best of all, she loves me for me. Not for my name, not for my reputation, not for my past. Though every now and then, when we're alone, she'll lean in, brush her lips against my ear, and whisper playfully, "I'm glad you still have your balls, James. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like."